Every week, I meet parents in my practice who are absolutely exhausted. They've tried everything, the behavior charts, dietary changes, and the various therapists. Yet their child is still struggling with major issues, transition issues, sleeplessness, and major sensory overload. Now, when parents seek answers from their most trusted advisors, all you're going to ever receive is a diagnosis, a label like ADHD, anxiety, or autism spectrum. These labels accumulate alongside appointments and, of course, the bills. Yet nobody is addressing the true issue, a nervous system which is stuck in chronic stress, which is why we refer to this as a busy brain syndrome. Your child doesn't need another diagnosis. They don't need to be labeled. However, we're going to explain today why it's occurring and how to address it. We're going to touch base on things that nobody else is discussing with you, and it's not going to be pushing another prescription or another label for a therapy. If you're a parent who has a child who seems to be wired yet exhausted at the exact same time, who has a meltdown over the smallest things, who can't sleep, who struggles in school, and for whom every therapy seems to be taking one step forward, but then two steps back. You're not imagining it, and you're not alone. Today we're breaking down what busy brain syndrome actually is, and why it's a nervous system regulation issue. It's not simply a behavioral challenge that your child is pursuing. We're going to walk through this three-phase perfect storm sequence that can actually wire this pattern into your child's nervous system before they ever enter into school, and how it actually shows up with sleep challenges, speech delays, emotional volatility, and sensory struggles. Finally, we're going to explain why therapies often plateau. They hit a certain point, and how we can shift that when we address the neurological foundation first. Now, before we jump into things, I want to share something that happened in my office last week. I had a little 15-year-old boy come in, and this kid was like a major rock star, if you think of it, wound up, wired, never calm. This boy had anxiety, meltdowns, sensory challenges, never able to sleep. Now, his family had tried absolutely everything, and really they were getting to be quite struggling because they were getting over this situation. I mean, it was hard to live with this kid. Now, once we laid him on the table, we got him his first adjustment, hit up this area at the top atlas axis region. And these two vertebrae are so important because they house the brainstem, they stimulate the vagus nerve. And once we adjusted this first segment on his first adjustment, it was like hitting a reset button. He calmed down, he relaxed. Now, it wasn't a miracle. It's exactly what happens when you address the neurological foundation. Now, that area is not permanent, but you do it with repetition, the kid's going to get amazing changes. Now, research shows that maternal cortisol levels, a stress hormone, it actually crosses the placental barrier, and it directly affects and rewires the brain structure in utero. So if mom has elevated prenatal stress, it is associated with increased risk in behavioral and emotional challenges in childhood. This nervous system dysfunction often begins before the child is ever born. Now, we look at this very differently in chiropractic, especially with this neurological lens. So instead of looking at the traditional diagnosis, which really is just an accumulation of different symptoms that are categorized into a different category, we look at it collectively as busy brain syndrome. And what it is that the autonomic nervous system within your child's body or within an adult, it has two modes. And I want you to think of it super simple. We have a gas pedal, we have a brake pedal. Now, the gas pedal is the sympathetic nervous system, and it is looked at as fight or flight. Now, it's truly designed for short periods of emergency situation. It's bursts of stress. It is not designed to be on full-fledged all day long. But here's the challenge is that the sympathetic nervous system really cannot designate the difference between you running from an emergency in a quick situation or chronic stress physically, chemically, emotionally that's inundating your body. And that's the difference in our society is that the nervous system was designed for short periods. Think of it, you're gathering water and all of a sudden you see a mountain lion right next to you and you start running. You have to have this physiological change so that you can adapt to that flight or fight situation. But in our society, we no longer have those stressors, but we have a lot of different stress that comes in different forms early on in life. And we're going to touch base on that with that perfect storm module in just a few moments. Now, on the other end, we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the brake pedal. And this really helps to calm, it's rest, regulate, and relaxation. And it really helps your child calm down. It helps with sleep, it helps with processing emotions, it aids in healing, and it's largely controlled by the vagus nerve, which is one of 12 cranial nerves that comes off the brainstem and is housed by the upper 2 vertebrae in your neck. Now, kids with busy brain syndrome, essentially the gas pedal's stuck down. The sympathetic nervous system is constantly firing, and it keeps your child in a chronic state of alert. They're very reactive. Their sensory threshold is dramatically lower than other kids. And it can feel very minor and it can feel very genuine to them to be overwhelmed, but it's their nervous system that has already reached capacity. And what happens with these kiddos is that if they're stuck in the sympathetic dominance for a long enough period of time, percentage of life, meaning hypothetically they are born into a lot of stress, their sympathetic nervous system is overly stimulated, they can be 10 years old and have 100% of their life in that sympathetic dominance, and it starts to express different symptoms. So in this situation, the gas pedal is historically stuck down, and it creates exhaustion, it creates overstimulation. The child then goes into a dormant state, a shutdown state, and it's really just more of a neurological protective mechanism to help their body recover when it's overall in this chronic stress. Now, when we talk about this 3-phase perfect storm, I see this situation on a regular basis, like daily basis, 9 times out of 10, when we look at kids with this busy brain syndrome. It starts off with prenatal stress. So what we're looking at is essentially, we look at mom's health even prior to conception. We're looking for early factors, fertility challenges, meaning if mom has challenges with fertility prior to conception, and then there is steps taken, not to necessarily get to the cause of the fertility stress, but when we look at factors to aid in pregnancy or conception, so IVF or certain hormonal therapies, which can aid in conception, but what happens is that there is an unhealthy environment inside mom's body to a respectful degree. I don't want to upset anybody, but when we look at it, if fertility is a stressor, the body is telling you something important. We don't want to ignore the body's physiology. Now with that, then we look at prenatal stress. We look at mom's stress levels, physically, chemically, or emotionally, and look at how well her body is actually growing and developing that baby. So because mom's stress levels can be really high, that cortisol crosses the placenta, goes into the baby's body, and it actually wires and pre-frames that neurological mindset inside that child. So essentially, the baby's nervous system is being developed in utero and can be overactive prior to even birth. Then on top of that, we look at birth interventions. In our society, we have pathologized the focus on birth, meaning it's a disease manifestation, it's no longer a natural process. Then there's these interventions like C-sections, forceps, vacuum extractions, there's difficult labors. These factors, don't even look at the epidural, the Pitocin, the environmental stressors inside a hospital during birth, but we look at all these factors that can actually impact the vagus nerve. And it leads to a nervous system dysfunction from day one, especially if there was already wiring for stress in utero. And then we look at these early childhood stressors. These stressors can be linked to things like antibiotic overuse. We look at symptoms like chronic ear infections, excessive screen time, chaotic environments that are already inundating a compromised nervous system. Now, each of these phases compounds the previous one, leading to the brain locked into a protective mode. And it hinders development, it affects sleep, and it massively affects the emotional connection as a child grows. So there are stressors that are not just physical. It's not like a car accident or an auto injury, something like that. We're talking massive inundation of physical, chemical, and emotional stress, and these things are building. Kids manifest symptoms early on, but they're often ignored by most doctors. Things where kids have breastfeeding challenges, they're having digestive limitations where they're constipated, they're having challenges with sleep. And these areas here, they may be diagnosed as colic, or they're having some sort of ear infection. and doctors treat the symptom, but the cause of the problem is still developing and starts to express itself later in life. And that's where we start to see then that these diagnoses of autism happen around 2 or 3 years old. We look at ADHD that happens around 4 to 5 to 6 years old, and we start to see that then it evolves into anxiety as a teenager. It's the same problem expressing itself in different manifestations. Now, the busy brain syndrome can show up with different symptoms. We touch base on a few of them very minorly with infants, but sleep challenges are one of the first and foremost. Kids struggle to wind down. They're tossing and turning, they're racing thoughts in their brain, and they're waking up way too often. Some feel physical tension, and it leads to stomach aches or headaches at bedtimes. Look at speech or communication struggles. There's an effective communication requires executive function and the ability to filter out distractions. So an overwhelmed nervous system creates a sensory input, and then the child lacks the capacity for higher level communication. So speech is oftentimes a struggle, and it's not that speech delays are due to a lack of comprehension per se, but it's the sensory integration that is difficult for the body to absorb the environment, for the brain to process the information, and then for the muscles and tissues to then actually work and synchronize together to express the information or to express the words. Then we look at emotional dysregulation. Kids are having severe meltdowns over the smallest little issues, and they experience incredibly long recovery times after they're upset. The inability to calm down isn't drama. It's their brain cannot de-escalate, and they're stuck in that sympathetic dominant state. Then we have kids with sensory overload and behavioral patterns. Kids may cover their ears, they may avoid textures, they may seem really intense physical input like crashing or jumping as a coping strategy, but movement helps them re-regulate during heightened tension. So sometimes these kids who are having little motor tics, or they're expressing themselves with movements or noise, they're trying to regulate their wound up body. And then we look at social development. When there's a survival mode, the brain prioritizes fight or flight, and it makes it extremely hard to read social cues and really to build real relationships. So a regulated nervous system is essential for healthy social interactions. Now, therapies are the traditional approach that people are using, and these therapies are used without necessarily identifying the root cause, understanding the foundational challenge. So things like OT or speech therapy or behavioral interventions, they're genuinely valuable tools, and I'm not here to replace them. But when the nervous system is stuck in fight or flight mode, those therapies are working against the foundational issue. They're not helping to get to the root cause of the problem. And in essence, when you have a stressed out individual, when you have a child that's stuck neurologically, you're not going to be able to teach them information. They can't sit still, they can't focus, they can't process the information. So the therapies should be used and will be granted the best results if we first get to the root cause versus trying to teach behaviors to a child who's stuck in a dormant state. Think of it like remodeling a home with a cracked foundation. Or think of it like pushing a car with the parking brakes still on. The therapies are pushing hard. Your child is really, they're trying, but the nervous system is the brake, and you're just not going to get from point A to point B within an appropriate time frame. Now, neurologically focused chiropractic care, we use technology that objectively measures how much stress and tension is actually locked inside your child's nervous system. And then we're able to understand exactly what is creating this interference. We use extremely gentle chiropractic adjustments to the upper cervical spine, specifically the atlas and axis, where the vagus nerve is most vulnerable. And it helps to restore this proper communication between the brain and the body. Now, subluxation is a combination of stuck joints and neurological interference that disrupts this brain to body connection. So in essence, when the foundation is addressed, everything else can build on top of it and it works much better. OT makes faster progress. Speech therapy starts to click. The behavioral strategies actually stick because your child's brain can actually have the capacity to learn, regulate, and adapt. Whereas before, it was in one ear, out the other. So if your child is stuck in this cycle and the meltdowns, the sleepless nights, the sensory struggles, the therapy plateaus, you don't have to accept this as your permanent picture. There is a path forward. You just have to look at it and approach it differently than how you have in the past. And it all starts with addressing the foundation. Now, we're not here asking you to give anything up with what you're currently doing. But if it's not working, don't keep trying it over and over again and expect a different outcome. Because here at Maximize Chiropractic in Sacramento, we are a neurologically focused chiropractic care office. We find where the stress is, we measure it objectively, and we help your child's nervous system find its way back to this calm and regulated balanced state. So click on the link below, send us a DM, or call our office directly at Maximize Chiropractic, which is 916-594-7630. Talk to one of our team members about setting up a consultation. Your child does not need any more labels. They need answers, they need help, and we're here to serve you.